I'm pissed. I do what I do because I'm pissed. There is a epidemic of FASD and people don't know about it. Our son has an FASD. He's almost 20. He has not received any of the supports or services that he should have that have been promised to him. And I'm mad. Nobody's talking about it. That needs to change.
What's up, everybody? That was today's guest, Natalie. My name is Daniel Unmanageable. This episode of Hard Knocks Talks is premier sponsored by the Saskatchewan FASD Network. Let's bring in Natalie. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, Daniel. I'm going to make you change your mind about cats. You just haven't met the right cat.
Donna's been trying to do that for like a lot of years. Like a lot.
Well, we'll talk.
All right. Is there anything that you would like to say before we jump in today?
So today, September, is the start of FASD Awareness Month, International FASD Awareness Month. So I'm so thankful you're having me on today because we are talking about FASD and how it's related to so many things. And I'm just really thankful for the opportunity to share our family's journey, my journey, and how people can support those individuals with FASD and just learn. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Let's jump in. Okay, before we tie into Natalie's speech here, we're going to just let you know that today's episode is also brought to you in part by Prairie Sky Recovery Center. So, Natalie, you admitted that you have had a complicated relationship with alcohol. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and why you're here today?
My backstory? Sure. So my name is Natalie Vecchione. My husband and I live in the U.S. We live in North Carolina, the farm country of North Carolina. We have 2 kids. Our son is 20, and he has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which we're going to talk about today. Our daughter is 7. She does not have an FASD, and we have 2 very different adoption journeys with both our kids. We built our family through adoption. My relationship with alcohol is complicated because I grew up as a child of an alcoholic. My stepdad and dad were both alcoholics. And I grew up in Alateen. I grew up knowing all 12 steps and all, everything. And, I remember, on Friday nights, my mom would go to Al-Anon. My stepdad would go to AA and I'd go to Alateen. Oh. And, I grew up and I was like, it really kind of was planted in me that, okay, this is never going to happen when I'm an adult and when because just knowing how alcohol, really wrecked our family's life. But then, we obviously transformed and we were, recreated in, in knowledge and faith and everything. I grew up with that very complicated relationship with alcohol. So what it led me to do was I met my husband in college and we became engaged. And in college, I started an internship at a substance abuse hospital here in North Carolina.
A substance abuse hospital, a hospital dedicated. Is that what I'm picking up here?
And that's it was state run. Yep, it was a state run. I don't even know if it's in existence anymore. This was I'm dating myself. This was the early 90s, back when you could go to a 30-day program and stay in and whatnot. I worked there, and then in grad school, I worked for the Veterans Hospital, their substance abuse units too. Mm-hmm. So yes, in North Carolina at the time, it was, in fact, the name of it was Walter B. Jones Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center. I'm really surprised I can remember that. And I actually received training as a substance use counselor. And again, in that training, even though it was the early 90s, there was never any mention of the cycles of alcohol in terms of how consuming alcohol during pregnancy impacts your unborn child. None of that. And we had quite a few women patients as well as male patients. So, but just that general knowledge was never shared. So then I started working at the VA during grad school, and again, no mention, excuse me, of how alcohol has that generational exposure. That's something I think that the addiction community, especially addiction professionals, and I know Robbie Seal, who's a mutual friend of ours, I know she talked about this in her interview with you, but that's really something that I think the addiction community really needs to dive into, is the generational exposures. Because when you drink, we know, how it changes it just changes everything. And if whether you're man or woman, it changes things that can impact your future children, because alcohol is such a harmful teratogen. So again, never learned about, and I counseled women, as and nothing about consuming alcohol during pregnancy ever came up, or that alcohol is the most harmful substance for an unborn child. And I think people are under the there's a myth that no, it's illicit substances, no, it's this or that, and NAS. That's really bad. I'm not taking that away. NAS is horrible.
NAS. What is NAS?
So neonatal abstinence syndrome, where a child is born addicted to substances. Okay. And they go through withdrawal when they're born. It's really horrible. It's really horrible. What you don't see and what is not shared is, I want to say research has shown that like 90-something% of the time, I can try to find that stat and send it to you, but a majority of the time, that child is also addicted to alcohol, born addicted to alcohol. You don't see those effects until you'll see it, but then you'll gradually see more of the impacts as that child grows. So none of this was ever, shared. And I still have good friends from my college days who are still in the substance abuse, addiction community, working as professionals. And when I tell them about, FASD and the work that we're doing, they're like, none of this is spoken about, to either our professionals or to our patients.
So how did you come to not only realize that this is like a sleeping dragon, like, so to speak, I guess? How did you come to realize that? And why did you care so deeply about it? Was like, this is an immediate thing? We're like, we need to talk about this. Or was it like a slow sort of progression?
It was a slow progression. So, my husband and I, we adopted our son 20 years ago. He was 2.5 weeks old when we adopted him. And we were told he was a medical adoption. He had medical needs, which we later found out were all tied into him having a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So, I stopped working and I worked part-time until he was 11. And as he grew older, the medical issues piled on, because there are here's a statistic, over 428 medical conditions are associated with having an FASD.
Wow.
We know too, in substance abuse, in the substance use community, we know how alcohol impairs every system. My stepdad used to have the DTs really bad. Even when he was sober, he used to have the tremors, and my son has tremors because because of how alcohol has impaired his neurological system. It's amazing how many similarities I know of FASD self-advocates who have liver damage because they were exposed to alcohol, in utero. So for our family, we were not told of FASD until our son, and I shared this, I co-authored a book, and I'm going to share these books with you like towards the end. I co-authored a book and I shared our journey. We were not told that that our son had suspected an FASD until he was almost 2. It kind of came up as medical issues were getting worse. He was starting to have developmental milestones were not being met. And he started having night terrors just before his second birthday, which, if you know about child development, night terrors are not uncommon, but they don't happen until kids are like preschool age, early elementary age. So that was a red flag, because I remember, just learning about that. So we had a sleep study done. And it was in a hospital where our son didn't regularly go to. It was a different children's hospital, and we were living in Philly at the time. So we went to this hospital. He did the sleep study, which is an oxymoron, because a sleep study, nobody sleeps and you really don't learn much. But what happened, there's my little rim shot. But what we learned a couple weeks later, when my husband and I came in, and we had our son on my lap, and it was this teaching hospital, and this pediatric neurologist came in, and he had a bunch of medical students with him. And my son was kind of facing them. He just walked in the group. They were all standing, and they looked at it. It was almost like, oh, okay, this is really daunting. He looked at us, and he looked at our son, and he didn't even say this to my husband or I. He turned around and told the entire group of medical students, look at that child. He's been prenatally exposed to alcohol, and let me tell you the reasons why. And we were like deer in headlights. We're like, what? Wait, this is the first time we've ever heard this.
Why he was exposed to prenatal alcohol?
No, this is the first time we were ever told that he was exposed to prenatal alcohol, and here's why. And here's why. There were a lot of knowns with our son's birth family's history, so there were a lot of suspicions. But this pediatric neurologist went down this list, and apparently our son checked off everything. So then, my husband and I spoke up, and we were obviously shocked, and we're like, okay, wait, what do we do about this? This is the first time somebody is confirming this. And very abruptly, and I'm sure your listeners and you all have been in the presence of medical professionals that have zero bedside manner. Very
just recently,
abruptly,
actually, I was.
yeah. Unfortunately, I wish it was something taught more in med school, dude. He said, just put him in early intervention and he'll be fine, which is a total lie, because early intervention does help. That part is true. However, FASD is a lifelong disability. It does not go away. It does not improve. Some aspects can improve with supports and services, but just like any other brain-based whole body disability, it's lifelong. And so he signed up for, he qualified for early intervention. But again, here's another thing that honestly, that pissed me off. That doctor never wrote that conversation in our son's medical records. It wasn't until 13 years later that we actually had a written diagnosis of our son having an FASD.
Wow.
We spent 13 years, and anytime we would bring it up to so between the age of 2 and when he was finally diagnosed at 15, our son easily saw 30, 40 different specialists. And that's just medical. I mean, tutors, educational professionals, therapists. We're probably talking close to 100 people our son had seen. And none of them ever said, we would bring it up. My husband or I would say, we were told that he was more than likely exposed to alcohol during, while his birth mom carried him. Could this be it? And he was piling up the diagnoses were piling up, and again, no, we don't think so. No, we don't think so.
So how do you think your journey, looking back now, how do you think your journey would have been different with your son had the doctor written that down, had that been a diagnosis from early on?
I think our journey would have been different because it would have been identified. And even though really FASD in the past 5 years is really gaining more momentum in advocacy and treatment and services, it would have been identified and he would have been eligible for other services. Again, however, once he was diagnosed, he still never received the services, but maybe back then he would have received some services, that would have been an improvement. And it's known, again, just like with any other brain-based diagnosis, the earlier the diagnosis, the better the outcome. You know, it took it took a whole lot of pivoting on our family's journey to get our son to where he is today. And it's some days are, it's like recovery. Some days are really good and you're just like high-fiving, and then other days are like you're, in a fetal position on the floor, just praying that the next day will come. I think we would have had more better days, and I think we would have had more. Our son would have had less secondary symptoms of having an FASD, which are things like, emotional symptoms. There are a lot of secondary characteristics in having an FASD. There are primary characteristics or secondary characteristics. And I know I watched Robbie's episode with you. I know she went over that. And so if you're watching me, go back and watch Robbie's episode, because she did a great job educating. But I think for us, it would have, again, I can't go back and change anything. It would have made things less, it would have made it less difficult for our son, especially when he was in school. And that's one of the reasons why we pulled him out of school, because we didn't want him falling through cracks. So yeah, in any type of disability or diagnosis, and this holds true, I think, for substance use, for addiction, for alcohol. The earlier you can receive a diagnosis, the earlier you can, I hope, qualify for supports and services. Now that's not always true, and unfortunately, that's not the norm. But there's that hope, especially if you live in a community that has those resources. The earlier you find out, the better the outcomes. So, yeah.
Cool. So let's take a quick break. We're going to hear from today's premier sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about your homeschooling experience. Sound good?
Sound good.
All right.
The research tells us there's no safe amount of alcohol during pregnancy. It can be as little as 2 binge drinking episodes to have a child who is impacted by FASD. I'm referencing the Safe Canadian Drinking Guidelines, and they reference a binge drink as 4 or more drinks on one occasion. I would say kind of put that into perspective. Someone who doesn't know that they're pregnant, that's 4 beer on one occasion. Maybe that's a couple of glasses of wine. Those glasses of wine might be a little bit fuller than the average glass of wine. So maybe those 2 glasses of wine is actually equivalent to 4. FASD doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone.
All right. Just like to let you know that this episode is also brought to you in part by Stronger Together Canada, peer-led support groups, by Moms Stop the Harm. Natalie, during the pandemic, I had my own experiences with homeschool, and my son has challenging behavior as well. We won't go too far into that, but I'm sure most parents can relate. And I almost didn't make it. Like, homeschooling was a challenge for me. So with the challenges that you're facing, why don't you, or have faced, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you began to homeschool and how that morphed into you raising awareness and helping others do the same?
Sure. So before I start, I want to correct you, if I can politely correct you. You virtually schooled at home. There's a big diff between virtual school at home and homeschooling.
Okay.
So what you did during the pandemic, and what just about the world did during the pandemic, was they schooled at home. Their school was in charge of their, your child's education.
We tried to do our own thing. We went and got we did. We got the workbooks, and we tried to have a curriculum, and we tried to do all that. And like, it was like, and we had to like,
did try it.
Okay. We did.
Got it.
Oh, hang on.
Wow.
Hang on a sec. Donna wants to say something here.
I was all over the internet and like Pinterest, whatever. And like, if I couldn't actually physically print that form or worksheet out, I would regenerate it on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear her?
I can. I can. Okay. So, okay, that's good. So I apologize. I stand corrected. So here's the thing about homeschooling. Sorry, Donna. Here's the thing about homeschooling. And it's actually, so at the start of the pandemic, resources were not as plentiful as they are now. People didn't know what they know now. And I think that people, unfortunately, are under the impression that you have to do it all yourself when you homeschool. And for us, we started homeschooling long before the pandemic. We started homeschooling when our son was 11. And I'll tell you this story because I'm actually interviewing a specialist about what's called the STPP, School to Prison Pipeline. And I think that's important to talk about too. Almost a large majority of children that have an FASD are usually referred to some sort of special education service. Now, there have been here in the States, and I'm sure it's similar in Canada, there have been numerous studies about how those kids in those special ed programs, 85% of them, I believe if you follow the pipeline to school to prison, those kids that are in juvenile justice, 85% of them were in a special ed program. And when our son was 11, he was not failing, but again, FASD is a spectrum disorder. It looks different for everybody. There are hallmarks and there are characteristics that are the same, but because it's a spectrum disorder, it looks different for everybody. Our son was not failing at the time. He was actually doing pretty good in some subjects, and then other subjects was where he needed extra support. So in 2014, his school at the time had this meeting with us, and this is leading to your answer, Daniel. So I apologize. His school had a meeting with my husband and myself, and they said, "Okay, we are going to pull him out," because he was in a mainstream classroom, and they were giving him add-on services, which is what he had always had. So, 2014, where we were living at the time, they said, "We're going to take him out. We're going to pull him out and put him in a special ed specific program." And he is going to make different friends and things like that. And this is what's going to happen. And we're also going to give him counseling because so he knows why he can't see his old friends anymore. And my husband and I just looked at each other, and that's when we knew that we were going to start homeschooling, that I was going to stop working and we were going to start homeschooling. And I'm glad we did that because we stepped out of that meeting, and one of the teachers, and again, I really think she was an angel. She pulled us into a custodial hallway so that nobody could see us. And she said, "Don't let your son go to that program. You will lose him." And that's when it was just like confirmation, like, okay.
What did she mean? Hannah, let's unpack that for a minute. What did she mean by "you'll lose him"?
So researching the school to prison pipeline.
Okay.
I think that's exactly what she meant. And learning more about how many kids in special ed end up in prison because so many of the schools don't know how to, and I'm using air quotes here, manage them, how to handle them, versus what it should be, which is supporting a disability, servicing a disability, accommodating. That's a huge word. And I know Robbie used that word, accommodating. If you can walk away from this conversation with, like any hashtags, accommodation, especially this month during FASD Awareness Month. FASD is a term. It's a term for a spectrum of disabilities that are brain-based and whole body caused by prenatal alcohol exposure. It's a disability. And so it's really, really sad, Daniel, that so often so many kids, not just with FASD, but with other brain-based diagnoses. So, genetic diagnoses, things like ADHD, autism, anything else, OCD, Tourette's, anything like that, that they end up in these special ed programs. And that teacher was brave enough to tell my husband and I, "Don't let him go there because you'll lose him." And I now, so many years later, now I know exactly what she meant. She did not want him to go to prison.
So,
and it's just, diving into it. I think, again, if you think about, and this is why for us, again, you guys tried it and that's awesome. And if regular school works better for you, that is fantastic. For us, where we lived at the time, and even, in the area we're in now, the services are not there. And a lot of parents are on their own. We talk about this all the time on our podcast, that so many parents have to create new roads because there's just no services out there.
Yeah.
And it's really scary thinking that, okay, my kid has a disability and, he's going to get punished. You don't punish a disability. You don't discipline a disability. Just like, and I remember growing up in substance, and having both, having my stepdad, who really I spent the majority of time with, my stepdad, my mom, and myself, having a stepdad having, an alcohol addiction to alcohol, and seeing how it affected his body, how it affected, and he was sober for quite a few years, but he still had those, residual effects from all those years of substance use. Seeing how it affects, that is, people don't see addiction, alcohol addiction. People don't see that on a medical basis. And it really needs to be seen as a medical basis, as a diagnosis, as a disability. I know that some people, so many people on their recovery, on their journeys and being sober, as they are further in their sobriety, they realize just the magnitude of how much their mind and their body was overtaken.
Yeah.
And think about a child who is prenatally exposed. They were born that way. They were born addicted. They were born with alcohol in their system. So that right there, they were born with a disability. And schools there really just needs to be the systemic education, Daniel, not just in schools, but in the medical community. Thinking about when I was, working with, the vets and with patients, in those facilities, it was spoken as behavior rather than this is something that medically has happened and we need to treat it as such.
So let's talk a bit about the homeschooling. Like I'm dying to hear about, like, how were the early days? Like, how was the first week? Like, were you pulling your damn hair out? Like, how long did it take until you found?
This is why I'm gray.
I'm Tell us about the gray hair.
So, it started out as and I'm going to do a little shameless plug here. This is our book, Blazing New Homeschool Trails. Written
Put it up again.
By,
there you go.
Yep.
Yeah,
Blazing New Homeschooling Trails. There we go. How's that?
Yep.
By Natalie Vecchione and Cindy LaJoy. You can get it on Amazon. Cindy and I, so she lives in Colorado. She has 5 children, 3 of whom have an FASD. We had 2 completely different journeys, but we both were desperation homeschoolers. Homeschooling was, it was like we didn't have the money to send our son to a private school that could meet his needs. That
the
was
last house on the block.
Exactly, more than an Ivy League, tuition. So I stopped working just because we bit the bullet and we went from, being a 2-income family to a 1.5-income family to a 1-income family. But honestly, Daniel, I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because for us, we really learned our son's strengths. And same thing with our daughter. Our daughter does not, again, she doesn't have FASD, but she does have, she has dyslexia, which is a brain-based diagnosis. And we are able to support her needs and focus on her strengths. So those early days were hard because I was trying to recreate school at home. And if I could go back and do it again, I would have given him time to decompress. And Cindy shares that too. If you think of our kids that have an FASD or any other brain-based diagnoses, but we're talking about FASD today because it's FASD Awareness Month. They have been like under this pressure cooker for so many years. Like, people are trying to, fit this program. Okay, you're going to fit here. You're going to try there. And it's a lot. It is a lot of pressure. And going back, if I could do it all over again, I would have given our son more time. We call it deschooling, to decompress, to just like be like, okay, this is it's almost like, when you are in recovery and you just have to like, okay, new places, new faces, what I used to tell,
I know it.
you gotta like, I used to tell the vets that, okay, new places, it's gotta be different. It can't be the old way.
And sometimes it's the same places. Sometimes it's the same places, but new thoughts. And you just have to, you have to sit there and
shift. You have to have that mind shift.
I do that almost every day in this room. So,
but that's good. See, that's you're getting it. So I would have realized that what was important. And I have a friend. She's amazing. She's an advocate, an entrepreneur. Her name is Candace Duggar, and she says, and I told her she needs to put this on a t-shirt. So when it comes to homeschooling, it needs to be mental health over math. It needs to be character over curriculum. And it needs to be relationship over reading. Because if you think about how our kids function in life, those second things are important. But if you have a kid and you're trying to get them to memorize math facts and they're like in the thralls of desperation of, depression.
And maybe you're yelling a bit, and maybe you're getting upset. And maybe it came to a point. I'm going to just interrupt the hell out of you right now. And like, go for it. Like when we were doing it, when we were trying to do it, it came to a point where it's like, my mental health matters too. We can't do it like this. We have to serious. No, I'm dead serious. It's funny, but it was.
That's
absolutely
real.
It was.
And admit again, just like, the program, admitting it is the first step. And you have to, not everybody, it again, and I'm not dissing regular school, not at all. However, in our family's journey, the options were not good in regular school. So we had to change it. And again, if I could go, and it's interesting because our kids have a 13-year age gap. So doing it all over again with our daughter, I learned a lot from our son, doing it with our son, and I can tell you that when you homeschool a child, our son's now 20, with an FASD, you really need to not only think about their strengths and support them, but you have to have supports and respite and strengths for you. You have to be able to have that time. And again, if I could go back and do it all over again, and Cindy and I talk about it in our book, I would build in more time for me, whether it's just a quick trip to the coffee shop or something. I didn't do that. And the other thing, which I think the pandemic has actually improved, online resources and homeschooling resources, things, because a lot of parents have realized, okay, you know what? Regular school wasn't working out so much. We're just going to stick to homeschooling, and again, you have to have that support. It's that mind shift like you're talking about. But for us, homeschooling made us realize that our son had these amazing strengths, which we all know that people that have brain-based diagnoses such as FASD, yes, there are needs, there are deficits, there are challenges, but there's also amazing strengths. And our son loves carpentry. He's learning contracting. He's in the process of rebuilding a workshop to his tiny house. And he's really good on computers. And he has these strengths that we would have never learned if he were in regular school, because the schools where we went to didn't have such programs, where he could learn carpentry or contracting or anything like that. And what we did was, the last part of his education, we did old-fashioned apprenticeships. He shadowed. In fact, he's working now with one of his apprenticeship teachers who's now a licensed contractor. He's working with him, and he is like, I want to say, if he heard me, he'd probably be pissed, but I think he's still homeschooling. It's just, he's officially done in the eyes of the state. But just like college, just like military, he's still, he's learning. Again, that's the beauty of apprenticeship. It's like that relationship makes it easy for him to input the information, and again, it's that relationship over,
Well, and you say that he's still learning and with this apprenticeship. I mean, but aren't we all? Aren't
exactly?
We all?
Yeah. And you know what I think too, and what I've learned, especially through him and now through our daughter, is that whenever we have anything that affects us in life, so it can be addiction, it can be, a disability, anything. Learning should be fun, and we should never stop learning. I think that we tend to focus on why aren't you up to, we compete. It's like these milestones are like, okay, well, you need to be here by this. Well, okay, you're not at this milestone, but maybe you've exceeded this other milestone. I think we just, as a society, and not just here in the States, but, everywhere, we focus so much on what the child's not doing rather than what they're doing great in.
Mm-hmm. So we got a comment coming in here from our friend Steph. Steph, thank you for the comment. Steph says, yes, mental health over math. My poor kid used to, 3 years ago, get made to stand at the board and do questions because he wasn't grasping it. Shocker, that did not help. Did you see that in school with your child before you pulled him out?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And again, it was inconsistent because he wasn't failing anything. It was just like, and that's part of FASD is the alcohol affects your memory and your brain. I mean, think about your worst. This is how I tell, because I've been on other podcasts, in the sober community. Think about your worst hangover, your worst, like just your very most. Now think about that happening to an unborn child, that feeling, that, the brain, the body, everything. That's what they're born with when they're born exposed to alcohol. So to answer that question, yes, because some days some days he could recite the facts that he learned, but then other days he couldn't. And again, you're putting that pressure, that pressure cooker on them to, okay, you need to remember it. Why aren't you remembering it? It's because my brain is not able to access it because of my disability. It's not because I didn't study or anything. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the primary characteristics of FASD is that working memory deficit. Some days, and that's because of how alcohol affected the brain cells in utero. Mm-hmm. Another book I would highly recommend to learn about FASD, and I'm sure Robbie spoke about it, is this book right here, Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane
she did,
Malvin. Yeah. It really, so I like in our journey to the Matrix, I love Keanu Reeves, and I love the Matrix, all the movies. When you learn about FASD and when you learn about alcohol and how it affects you, it's like you're taking the red pill or the blue pill. And when you take that pill and you learn, it's like you said, it's a whole mind shift. It's like your mind is just blown by, wow, I didn't realize alcohol touched all these parts in society. I didn't realize that alcohol does all of this to your body and your mind and everything. It's like these tentacles that just won't let go of you. So she really explains that how alcohol impacts, when you're prenatally exposed. So that's a great book. But yeah, I mean, think about it. If you had, say you had traumatic brain injury, which FASD essentially is, it's just happened before birth. It is brain injury because of any amount of alcohol exposure. No amount is safe. There is no safe amount of alcohol to consume during pregnancy. It's that. If you have a TBI from an accident or something, say,
what's a TBI?
You're a vet.
Traumatic brain injury.
Traumatic brain injury.
Yes. My mouth worked before my brain did.
But say you have that. So, and that resulted in you have working memory loss,
Yep.
Or say another example is, degenerative from like Alzheimer's or dementia. So some days your brain is able to recall something, but then some days you're not. That happens with FASD because the injury happened before birth. So, our son some days would be able to recall his multiplication facts, but then other days he couldn't. And it wasn't because of anything he did. It was because it was, was his brain able to, get that? Not today. So yeah, it trying differently rather than harder, really, it goes into the nuts and bolts about FASD and
Mhm.
how it's a brain-based whole body disability.
So let's talk a little bit now. You mentioned that you were finding his strengths in all of this
Yes.
journey that you've now. Is there strengths? Like, what are the strengths that are characteristic of FASD or people who are challenged with that?
With FASD, many, and she talks about it in her book. We talk about it in our book. Things like creativity, art, music, working with their hands, being physically active, being, our son loves dirt bike riding and going out and just going in the woods with his dirt bike. Things like working with animals, working with, trades. There are so many, just like with any other brain-based diagnosis, where there are impairments in the brain, there are also parts of the brain that make up for it. And that's why so many of our kids fall through the cracks, because there's so many inconsistencies because of things like dysmaturity, because of things like, developmentally, maybe they meet their chronological age in some areas, but then they don't in other areas. So there's many strengths. I want to plug one more book, Daniel. And
It's okay. Plug away.
So I helped this young man write a book about what it's like living with FASD. He's 23. His name is Kenny LaJoy. His book just came out last week. It's called It's Okay to Be You, Living Well with FASD or Other Disabilities. Kenny has an FASD. He shares so wonderfully in that book how he was able to, through his mom was Cindy, who I co our book with. He talks about how he was able to learn his strengths, and this is a kid. He wrote this book when his family adopted him. He knew no English or, no reading, writing. And on top of that, he had an FASD. So he was a very late bloomer when it came to reading and writing. But once he did, he took off. I mean, I recommend his book over my book any day of the week, because he so eloquently talks about what it's like having an FASD, and not just an FASD, but anybody else with any type of disability can read it and just go, okay. It's a book. It's affirmation, it's education, and it's encouragement. So that's an example of someone. I also know of a wonderful self-advocate. She is amazing. I've had her on my show. She's a small business owner, and her business is booming online, and she has a brick and mortar store. She is incredibly creative. I have another friend who's an FASD self-advocate, and she's an author, and she's fantastic. So just like any of us, so often we get wrapped up in what's not good enough, or what, society brushes us off as, versus, okay, we have these strengths. We just have to have the opportunity to be able to let them shine.
Yeah. So speaking of society, how can we as a society better do in knowing and identifying and supporting those challenges with FASD across the societal spectrum?
So I know in Canada, and I know here in the States, there's push towards legislation for awareness, for services, supports. That's what we need. And it needs to be a systemic thing. Right now, it's really just like, state by state, province by province, there's supports here, but there's not over there. It really needs to be a push. So if you're watching or listening, wherever you're at, reach out to your local government, or even to your federal government, and say, hey, we need to have more education, support services, funding, research about FASD. I know there in Canada, there are CAN FASD is amazing, and they're doing so many things this month for FASD Awareness Month. I also know that your sponsor today is doing amazing things. You can connect with local FASD networks. You can also connect with national networks. Here in the States, it's called FASD United, FASDunited.org, which really has grown in the past few years. Just be vocal, be a big mouth and say, okay, I've learned about this and I want to help. I want to support, these kids who become young adults who become adults because it's a lifelong disability. But again, with the right supports and services and the right, I like to say, the right tribe, and it's the same thing in sobriety. You have your tribe, you have your group of people that have your back. It's the same thing in the FASD world. The world doesn't understand addiction. The world doesn't understand sobriety, but we do. So having that tribe that can support you and that can say, okay, we have your back and I know I can count on you and I know that I'm going to help you with whatever you're looking for. When you have that, that's gold. And another thing I can say is that know that you're not alone. Whether you have a loved one with an FASD, whether you have an FASD, whether you're, in recovery, starting recovery, you're deep in recovery, but maybe there's a turn in the road. Know that you're not alone. I think this journey of addiction, this journey of FASD, this journey of being affected by a substance and having a substance change your body and your mind and your life. In this journey, and I think this is where all of, my growing up and then my, working and now parenting, I think this is where this all ties in. The world doesn't understand, but we do. And that's where it's like the Matrix. And once you understand and you find that tribe that gets you, then that is, I can tell you right now that that's more than half the battle. And so if you're listening or watching, you can reach out to me, Natalie at FASDHope.com or FASD Hope. Robbie's been on the show. She's amazing. She's a wonderful advocate and educator in Canada. We're here. That's why my husband and I started FASD Hope, because we wanted other families and other individuals with FASD to know that they weren't alone. It took 15 years for our son to get a diagnosis, and he got it the hard way. He got it while he was hospitalized. Mm-hmm. And the reason why he knows I speak to other people. He knows I wrote the book. He knows, and he's like, Mom, I don't want anybody else to have to wait 15 years to get the right diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And to me, he's my hero. He is the reason why I do this, because he has shared bravely that I know there are other people walking in my shoes, and I don't want them to have to wait as long as we have for the right answers. Yeah. And I can say that honestly too with anybody in your recovery, that find that tribe, find those people. And when you know you're not alone, that is like, that is just key. I can't emphasize that enough.
So when we talked, excuse me, you related your journey to, and I'm going to say this wrong. I'm going to say it wrong. I might not. You related your journey to the Japanese art of kintsugi.
Yes, you said it
right. So tell us about that. Tell us about that.
Okay. And I have a beautiful little example right here. So this is kintsugi. Kintsugi is the Japanese art of taking something that's been broken or shattered and then filling it, you can see, with, this one is with like a gold. It's like a either gold or gold plated type of substance. But see all those cracks in there. Sorry, you have to look at my big old hands, but you see all those cracks. This is a little eggshell. And
your fingernails are very clean.
Thank you. I need a manicure. And it's funny because if you look at that used to be shattered. That used to be like broken. And in kintsugi, people who are, kintsugi artisans, they take what's been broken and they actually make it more beautiful. Like if I looked at this eggshell before, I would have been like, oh, that's just an eggshell. But somebody, thank you, Etsy, for letting me find this, filled it. Somebody filled this artisan filled it with like this liquid gold kind of, and it could just be gold paint, but what they do is you take something that's broken and shattered, and you fill it with either gold or silver or anything, because what I think I relate my life, our journey, our FASD journey, and recovery too, definitely, is that we should honor the broken parts of our past. We should recognize it and honor them. And they shouldn't be like hidden or concealed. But what we can do is we can use the pieces and we can put them together. So like for me, I share my faith, my family, learning about FASD. That became the gold that took me from shattered, broken mama to, mama bear advocate. And I think we can all liken our lives to that. Like, take what was supposed to break you and turn it. And you're Daniel, like you and what you're doing is a classic example of a life in Kitsugi. You have taken all the stuff that was intended to break you and everything, and you are sharing your lived experience, which I think, honestly, lived experience is the best education. And I know you've said that. I've watched your shows and I know you've said that.
Yeah.
And turn it into this beautiful piece of art and use, what makes you, what made you transform, so like I said, for us, our faith, our family, our relationships, learning about FASD, that turned the brokenness into beauty. And I think that we need to just really look at our lives in this community, in the sober community, in, the disability community, in the neurodiversity community, as, okay, we were broken and now we're put together. And that, to me,
where's the strengths?
Yes. And the strengths are in that weaving of the gold or silver or whatever that binds it together. And you come out of it actually looking more beautiful than when you went in.
So with that thought in your mind, do you ever catch yourself thinking, when you say the word disability, do you ever catch yourself thinking like, maybe that's not the right word for this?
So, and it's funny, Kenny talks about that in this book. I think no. And let me tell you why. Because FASD and other brain-based diagnoses are a disability when it comes to, we use that word because you need accommodations, you need supports and services. And if you say that you have a difference or something like that, then if there are supports and services that you are entitled to. So for example, someone using a wheelchair or somebody who has a visual impairment has a disability where they require accommodations. It's the same thing with FASD, any other brain-based diagnoses. Yes, it's a disability. However, on the flip side of that, so yes, I'm going to say yes. Do I ever say not to use it? That all depends on every individual. And Kenny
on the
shares
audience.
that in his book.
Depends
it depends
on the audience.
It depends on an individual. However, on the flip side of that, what you can do is share how this disability, this diagnosis, this journey has made you stronger in these areas. I think that using the term disability is, and again, I know other people say neurodiversity, which I respect. Other people say, oh, it's a difference, or, I think it's important to use the term disability when it comes to
broken
diagnoses.
policy.
See, because if you
got to check the boxes. You got to check the boxes.
You got to check the boxes to receive those services. And to be honest with you, unfortunately, so many services are just not there. And I think that's where hopefully that can lead to systemic. So for example, our friends in California just had a law passed. It's actually going to the governor's desk, as we speak, that FASD will be recognized in all schools in California as a diagnosable developmental disability. That right there is opening thousands of doors for millions of families, because the prevalence of FASD here in the States, this is a conservative number, is estimated to be 1 in 20. And that is 2.5 times more than autism.
Wow.
So we need to, again, but it's what you're comfortable in saying. If you don't want to call it a disability, I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
For me and for Kenny, for example, we call it a disability because there are things that require accommodations. If you have a person who has visual impairment and requires an accommodation, you're not going to deny them because, you have a difference in your vision. No, they require an accommodation. They require services. It's the same thing with having a brain-based diagnosis. It's not lessening the individual at all. For me, it's semantics in how, okay, now we need accommodations. Now those kids in California, because of that law, will receive those services, and hopefully less of them will be out of that school to prison pipeline. Less of them will end up, having those horrible second and third types, tertiary, secondary, and tertiary characteristics and symptoms, because it's being acknowledged. Yes, it was a disability that happened before birth. So again, and I know that there are many advocates out there that have different points of views, and I respect that.
Yeah.
But as a mom on this journey who's been trying to fight for services for my son, ever since he was born, we use the term disability because
it's action based. It produces results.
Exactly. And here's the other thing too, Daniel, and I want to share this because I know you'll appreciate this. The disability was not caused from the behavior of birth mom drinking or bio mom drinking. Because if we say that, then that puts the stigma on birth mom or bio mom. And we don't want that. We don't want that. Just like I know in the sober community, there's so much stigma in the world about addiction and about recovery, because it's all about what you did. You made this choice. No. You became addicted. We know that addiction runs in generations. We know that alcohol use, just any type of substance use, any type of addiction, we know it runs in families. So it's not
exclusively.
limited.
That's not the only reason people become
exactly.
addicted.
Thank you.
Just going to throw that shit out there. But it is like...
Thank you. But it does. It does. And so therefore, we also need to recognize that, and I just lost my train of thought.
Because I came rushing into your talk with like a wrecking ball.
No. Okay. So So what I was saying is that we need to take that stigma off the person's action and instead put it on the teratogen, put it on that substance. Because it's not the person, it's the substance, it's alcohol, it's whatever substance that happened. That is the cause. So as a systemic, again, getting into that whole matrix thing, you open and everything was like, whoa, we need systemic action, systemic research, systemic education about how do we support and serve and just help people who have addiction, because it just goes down. We had on FASD Hope this amazing Dr. Larry Bird. He's an amazing advocate, clinician, researcher here in the States. He's out of University of North Dakota. And he talked about the 3 generational cycles of FASD. How not only FASD impairs that person, but then that person's children. And
I've been told recently that there's no evidence to really back that the like when we talk about grandma drinking during her pregnancy and then daughter having markers found in her eggs. Now I've been told that there's no solid proof of that.
So there is research done showing, and if we think about, just again thinking about science,
Mhm.
a woman, when a woman is born, she's born with all the eggs that she's going to have.
Yes.
So if alcohol, and which we know alcohol affects, and this is again just basic science, alcohol affects every system in the human body, including the reproductive system.
Mhm.
So if mom was exposed to alcohol, then that means that those eggs were exposed. Now, will that child, grandchild have an FASD? Possibly not. However, if there wasn't that direct correlation. So grandma to mom, FASD. Okay.
Mhm.
But mom to grandchild, if there was no alcohol in her pregnancy, during those 9 months, there are still things that have been affected by grandmom's
Mhm.
exposure. And I can share with you the episode with Dr. Larry Bird, but he does a much better job explaining it than I do. But it really does. It's because, again, what we know from substances, alcohol is the most harmful because
Mhm.
it permeates all of those systems. So yes, there is. Now, again, is it, is that grandchild, is it like full-blown FASD? No, because there's a lot of factors. But because
There
that
could be
child,
markers present.
exactly.
So
Exactly.
you're saying
and
it's
there's a lot
possible,
of
not it's, yeah, okay.
For the grandchildren, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And again, there's a lot of factors that go into that, nutritional factors in the pregnancy, other trauma factors, because we know that FASD is a prenatal trauma because alcohol did prenatal brain damage and
Mhm.
body damage. So again, there's a lot of factors. And again, I'm just a mom with lived experience, so I can't
Mhm.
talk about that, but I can point you to the episodes that I say, oh yeah, we talked about that, or we
Mhm.
discussed that. So yeah, but again, the whole getting back to the whole moral of the story
Mhm.
is we need to stop disciplining somebody's diagnosis.
Yeah.
And if you think about the sober community and how many people have shared how they were punished because of, they
Yeah.
had a relapse or something like that. We need to stop having this punitive system for
Punishing the trauma out of
anyone.
people.
Thank you. Thank you. Whether it be lived experience trauma, like you said,
Mhm.
happening after birth, or prenatal trauma, such
Mhm.
as FASD. We need to, you don't discipline a disability. You don't discipline a diagnosis. You need to
Mhm.
stop punishing trauma. Thank you.
Okay, I
That
think
right there.
we're coming to the end. Where can people find you? Are you Facebook, LinkedIn? Where are you?
So yes, on all socials, I'm on FASD Hope at FASD Hope. You can find FASD Hope wherever you find your podcasts, and you can also reach out to us. Visit our website, fasdhope.com, or you can email me, Natalie at fasdhope.com. And I just appreciate this opportunity, Daniel, to kick off FASD Awareness Month by letting me share our journey, and I just appreciate all that you do. I really do. You are a rock star.
Oh
And
my. No, keep going.
Okay.
It's fine. It's fine. Keep going.
we'll make the episode a little longer. We got to fit this in.
Yeah.
But I really do, Daniel. I again, having worked many decades ago in the sober community, and in the addiction community, I just appreciate your voice, and I know that so many others see what you're doing as a lifeline in their recovery. So
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, and likewise to all of those things you just said. Keep going. Keep raising awareness. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll let you go. Take care, my friend.
Thanks.
All right, that's it. If you like us, give us a follow, share this episode, tell your friends. Let's make some noise. Thank you, and